Hello, today we'll be discussing Chapter 6, Media and Technology. So we're going to look at technological advancements and think about how technological advancements have helped improve our lives, how technological advancements have helped improve existing technology. You want to think about movies, for example, and how movies stemmed from photography. You want to think about how computers stemmed from punch card readers, or how cell phones have made conversing with others a lot easier. This idea that you're not stuck to a landline in your home, that you have the ability to essentially communicate with individuals from anywhere and just have a conversation with them in real time. And so when we think about technology and we think about all of these wonderful new advancements, you want to think about how technologies have shaped the way that we've grown, have shaped the way that social institutions have grown, and you want to think about how technologies have led to new media. You want to think about how technologies create new opportunities within our social world. You want to think about a technology that is not relevant to today is going to be short-lived because it won't be embraced by society. Society might say this particular technology doesn't serve a meaningful purpose. And so I want you to think about this. I think all of us are old enough to perhaps remember payphones. They were in front of liquor stores, they were in the malls, sometimes they were on school campuses. Payphones were viewed at one point as a revolutionary technology. Well, think about them today. Payphones, if you could find one, are only relevant when A, your cell phone is dead, B, you don't have reception, or C, you don't have a cell phone. And you want to think about how technology can phase other technologies out within a relatively short period of time. You want to think about beepers, if anyone remembers those, right? Where you would call someone and it was like this little box that would vibrate or beep, right? To let you know, hey, you need to call person A, person B, and person C. And how those were replaced by cell phones. A very short-lived experience. You could even look at BlackBerry, if anyone remembers BlackBerry, the cell phones. Very hip, very cool. You were able to do a lot of different things on them. And what phased out BlackBerry for the most part? iPhone. Because iPhones and other Androids, you can argue, or Androids, created a plethora of opportunities that the basic BlackBerry just couldn't perform. And so when we think about technology, you think about all the technological processes that exist within our society. You think about all the inventions that have been used to advance society. And so technology can be as simple as a pair of pliers. It could be as simple as an instruction manual, for example, or it can be as complicated as a cell phone or a laptop or an iPad. You want to think about, as human beings, the unique opportunity that we have, that we consistently create new technologies to make our lives easier. We consistently create new technologies to improve our lives. But at the same time, we can argue that this can contribute to certain social problems, for example. See, technological advancements at the root are not the cause of social problems. The cause of social problems are really, how do humans adopt this technology? How do we use this technology? And who gets to use this technology? And so we look at this example of the McDonaldization of the United States. And the McDonaldization of the United States focuses on the McDonald's corporate model, which focuses heavily on efficiency, calculability, predictability, and technology. This idea of efficiency. How fast can we get that burger, that shake, those fries done? How many customers can we service within a short period of time? I don't know if any of you remember this, but at one point, McDonald's had this policy that, like, if you didn't get it within 30 seconds or 45 seconds, your food was free. It was this idea of let's get the lines going, especially when it comes to the drive-thru. They follow this concept of calculability in the sense that they know the cost of every single item that goes on that burger or that chicken sandwich. They know it's going to cost 10 cents for the bread. They know it's going to cost 15 cents for the meat. They know it's going to cost a penny for the lettuce, and so on and so forth. The predictability aspect is this idea of, if I go to McDonald's in West Covina, and then I go to McDonald's in Montebello, then I go to the McDonald's in Commerce, the Big Mac should be made the exact same way and should taste the exact same. Also, to a degree, and this is outside of McDonald's, Walmarts and Targets, not all, but many, have adopted this business practice of making sure that the stores have a layout that is similar to most Targets or most Walmarts. Because what business studies have shown is that when consumers or customers go into a store and the store has a similar layout, they feel more comfortable because they know where everything's at. And when people feel more comfortable, they are more inclined to spend. Versus walking through the stores and say, okay, I'm looking for this or I'm looking for that. You grow frustrated. You're not really paying attention to the items that are on the shelf because you're looking for that one particular item, and you're less likely to spend. What we also see in the McDonaldization of America, or we can actually just say globally of society, is that technology has started to replace human workers. Because human workers take sick days, human workers work slower, human workers make more errors. And technology, as far as machines go, are far more efficient, are far more predictable. And you just need to fine tune them, right? Upgrade them or maintain them every once in a while. Well, what happens is that when you replace individuals with machines, think about how that contributes to the social problem of people losing jobs. We can argue that our society becomes more isolated to an extent. Think about when you go to Target, for example, you have the regular checkout lines with the Target employee, and then you have the self-checkout. Same thing, I think Ralph's and Monterey Park has that. I know Home Depot's have it to an extent, right? And you go through the self-checkout, perhaps because it's a shorter line. But what we don't realize at times is that that's collecting data. And if these companies determine that more and more people are growing comfortable with going to a self-checkout line, they'll just bring more of those machines in and reduce their human workforce, at least when it comes to checking out individuals. So you want to keep that in mind. And that's something that I keep in mind every time I go, is that these machines, these self-checkouts will eventually, deprive individuals of certain jobs. And that creates a major social problem. Not that one store in Pico Rivera being Target will cause a tremendous amount of social problems, but when you multiply that by 100, 200, 300, and so on stores, that's a lot of individuals that potentially go unemployed. Now, what we know is that technology varies from country to country. That not all countries have access to the same technological services or devices. Some cities, some towns may not have consistent internet access, right? There may be a digital divide. And we saw that throughout the pandemic, that there were communities and individuals within those communities that experienced a digital divide a lot harsher than others. There are individuals who did not have internet access, and now internet access became a mandatory thing for work as well as for school. And so you want to take that in consideration, that an individual's geographic location, that an individual's socioeconomic status can limit their exposure to some of these technological advancements, that these technological services may not necessarily be there. What we see also is when we look at educational attainment or degree attainment, when we look at income, when we look at race and ethnicity, and we take all these factors into consideration, that to an extent, these can be predictors of internet access. A family with higher income is more likely to have a higher quality of internet service than a low-income family who may or may not have internet service. What we know is when it comes to race and ethnicity is that white and Asian Americans generally have more access to and use the internet at a higher rate than African Americans and Latinos, Hispanics. And what we also know is that college graduates are more likely to use the internet and have access to the internet as opposed to individuals who did not complete high school. So we look at technology and technological developments, and we seek to determine, well, how do they affect society? Well, we have what we call cultural lag. And that means that technology is evolving at a much faster pace than society can actually follow. And so what we find here is that there's this gap, and this gap begins to widen and widen and widen between the technological abilities of a society and a society's willingness to adopt that particular technology, for example. And so we start to think about this example. Many K-12 classrooms face cultural lag because many of the teachers that are teaching may have not grown up in a computerized world, and they may not necessarily be comfortable relying on technology. And so school districts and individual schools have to invest a considerable amount of money into making sure that their faculty and staff members are literate in the new technology that exists. That is a ball that was dropped at the beginning of the pandemic. See, many teachers had not had experience using Zoom, let alone trying to teach a class on Zoom, and then trying to use all these different applications that are designed to strengthen instruction. And so teachers within a week or two had to design their whole curriculums to be taught online. And many school districts did not provide the support. And so the teachers learned through trial by error. Many teachers didn't feel supported. They felt burnt out, for example, because trying to teach a class is incredibly difficult, especially in the K-12 level. I mean, imagine trying to teach a kindergarten class of 20 to 30 students online and getting those kids to learn, but also to focus. Teachers had not been taught how to use these external applications, as I mentioned before, to enhance learning and then tie that into their curriculum. So you may have had teachers who are saying, okay, well, I guess we got to learn math, so just log on to this particular program, Splash Learn or whatever it may be. Complete those assignments, and I guess you did your math for the day. You had other teachers who literally just gave up. They didn't teach. They just gave their students busy work. And they thought, well, the pandemic's eventually going to end, so we'll be able to return to regular instruction at that point. You want to think about technology and how technology can be used in many ways as a motivation for culture to change. This idea that technology is designed, as I mentioned before, to make life easier for people. But it's driving the culture, not serving the culture. And what do we mean by that? Well, think about our obsession with cell phones. Think about our obsession with social media or text messages, and how we have this constant, you can argue, subconscious perspective that drives us to check social media posts, that drives us to check our text messages. And think about how that changes how we interact with one another. You want to think about how we may be in social situations where we struggle with conversing with others because we hide behind this, our cell phones. So we may have a lot of confidence and be able to talk to a lot of individuals by simply just typing on a screen. But when it comes to actually having a face-to-face conversation, that might be very difficult for some of us to do or to have. You want to think about how television and the internet have inspired creativity, for example, how they have created opportunities for innovation. You want to think about how technology is largely intertwined into our current culture. You want to think about problems that exist with technology. You want to think about identity theft, for example. A significant amount of Americans every year, and this is not exclusive to just Americans, struggle with experiences of computer fraud and credit card scams. You want to think about privacy issues and how individuals may be able to acquire certain information from what you post on social media sites. See, individuals divulge a lot of information at times on social media sites, and this can create issues with not only their own privacy or maintaining their own identity, but it can also create issues with friends, with employers, and even with the law. You want to look at technology as a global village. And it's this idea that rapid advancements in technology can better suit individuals' needs by facilitating connections between people in one state or one country and others across the world. This idea that technology has contributed to this development of a global society. And it's reduced the size of the world to some aspects, or in some regard, I should say. This idea that you can converse with someone in real time when you're in New York or LA and you're having a conversation with someone who lives in London. This idea that we don't necessarily have to call them. We don't have to wait for snail mail, right? The mail letters or whatever it may be. If I want to contact my cousin who lives in such and such country, I could log on to Facebook, for example, or WhatsApp and send him or her a message. I can send pictures easily. That's what Instagram has, for example, created. I have family members across the United States, right? I don't see them too often, but they ask about my son. So on my private Instagram page, I post pictures of my son, and individuals are able to witness him growing up. It allows us to feel closer to one another, even if we're thousands of miles apart. You think about the media, and the media focuses on, well, what are the channels that we use to store and to receive information? You think about print media, newspapers, television, radio. You think about the internet. When we look at print media and we're looking at newspapers, magazines, books, this has existed for many, many years, but it is on the decline because individuals are not necessarily reading newspapers anymore. Even books, individuals are downloading books onto their laptops, onto their Kindles, onto their iPads, whatever it may be. That's just the way of the world right now with the advancements in technology. So we see the print media arena beginning to decline. We look at television, we look at radio, and we think about how those are constantly evolving. The idea that there's not really a publicly funded television or radio station that's consistent other than maybe PBS and a handful of others. For the most part, most television and radio stations seek to make a profit. They seek to be funded by advertisers. And so they're chasing ratings. Who can get the most viewers? Who can get the most listeners? So what that can contribute to is this idea of sensationalizing the news, focusing on specific stories that you know will capture people's attention. For example, car chases. Car chases, people are glued to the TV. That means more viewers for that particular television station. And we look at the internet and the idea that global communication is quick and easy, right? This idea that we can share our opinions, we can share our life experiences relatively easy. Think about all the different social media sites that exist, and think about what type of communication we have on those social media sites. You think about advertising, I should say, and how businesses and corporations seek to advertise their products by bombarding us with commercial after commercial after commercial to convince us to buy their product, to convince us to, hire their service, for example. And these attempts can be very, very effective, because when we go to the grocery store, for example, we might gravitate towards a particular brand because we're aware of Kellogg, for example. If you listen to 93.5 K-Day, I had my students at one point do a study on this. It's check advancement services, it's injury lawyers nonstop on K-Day. Everything's, have you been in an accident? Make sure you call Big Al, right? Oh, you need a cash advance? How much do you need? We can loan up to $5,000. And so when you need a cash advance or you need an attorney, who pops into your head? Sweet James, for example, or whatever, Loan Mart or whatever it may be. And so you want to keep that in mind, that these attempts at times can be very effective. We look at the bias of media and how the media at some time, even though they're the fourth estate, even though they're supposed to serve as the checks and balances, they may lean in a particular direction. Fox News, conservative; CNN, liberal, moderate; MSNBC, very liberal. And so you want to take that into consideration, because then you're getting their rendition of the truth. They may not be portraying the facts objectively or in a truthful manner. And so individuals at times may be convinced that this particular news network is a trustworthy source. This particular newspaper is a trustworthy source. And they may take what is being told to them as fact, and that can influence their way of thinking. We look at media bias research. And when we look at media bias, what we find is that our own personal networks at times can play a major role in how we interpret media bias to be. Think about who you hang out with. Think about how those individuals have shaped your perspective. Perhaps, for example, people with like-minded perspectives on a particular political issue. They could argue that because the 10 of us believe A, B, and C, anything outside of that is practicing a bias. But what begins to happen is that if you start to have a more diverse social network or group of individuals, you become more open-minded. You begin to understand that there's a difference in opinions. You may not necessarily view that network as being more biased than another, or that newspaper as being more biased than another, because you understand that, hey, there are multiple sides to the story. And so you want to take that into consideration. You want to think about how media organizations can portray or share a particular story with information that is misleading or false. You could think about how, when it comes to crime, many media organizations are more likely to show a black or brown face, or when it comes to an act of terrorism, they may be more inclined to show someone who is Muslim or who they perceive to be Muslim, because those are sensationalized stories. You think about media and politics, and you think about the slants that may exist. And as I mentioned before, MSNBC versus Fox News. Both networks are guilty of slanting the news to fulfill their own ideologies. that a lot of times this is not fact that they're sharing, they're opinion pieces. See, I think that's where a lot of people get a lot of this mistake, and they assume that these individuals are experts who are talking on these wide variety of topics. For the most part, that's simply not the case. You're not getting individuals who did a lot of research on this particular topic beforehand. You're getting individuals who are strictly sharing their opinion. For example, on Fox News, we hear a lot of anti-vaccine conversation. What many of those Fox News hosts fail to share with their viewers is that they themselves had to get vaccinated in order to be on the show that day. And what I mean by that is Fox News has a corporate policy that requires vaccinations. But these same individuals who are required to get a vaccination to maintain their job are telling their viewers, don't get vaccinated and fight the system and stand up for your freedom, when they themselves didn't practice what they preached. And so you want to take that into consideration. You want to take into consideration the influence that these networks have in swaying someone to vote for a particular policy or vote for a particular candidate. You want to take all this into consideration because they have agendas that need to be fulfilled. Right? Bias is not something that they toss aside. Bias is something that they practice on an everyday basis. The reporters are told what to report on. They don't have that freedom. And so you want to take that in consideration. You want to take in consideration the sensationalization of the news takes place because they understand the larger the audience size, the more influence, the more power you have as an organization. You want to understand that when the media, especially television, is used or consumed, I should say, it has the ability to mesmerize people as if they're drugged. It can make us numb to certain types of information. It can desensitize us to certain types of information, especially violence, for example. This idea that the media can serve at times as mindless entertainment, right? It can distract us from focusing on more important issues that are around us. And so from a conflict theorist perspective, conflict theorists will say that, well, the media is just a propaganda machine, that the media is used as a means to control the lower classes, because the lower classes tend to be passive receivers of information. And what we see is that when we talk about the media, Herman and Chomsky argue that there are 5 important filters through which information must pass before it gets to your television, your newspaper, your radio. And all of these different filters influence the outcome of what we consume. The mass media size, limited ownership, the profit motive dominate decisions. Very few companies exist today, and these companies tend to own a majority of the media outlets. That these media companies stay in business through advertising, so they're not going to raise any issues that are in opposition to their advertisers. We see this idea that media sourcing generally comes from the government and experts who are connected to an issue being discussed. Not meaning that the individuals speaking on the screen are experts, but that the information, or the conversation starting the information may have been leaked by someone. You see individuals who are political appointees, for example, they go on and they have their talking points, right? They believe that their ideas are accurate. They believe their ideas represent the truth. They believe their ideas are the best. We see if reporters independently attacked a corporation or government for influencing the work, well, they may be labeled as troublemakers. Right? They may not have access to these experts who leak information to them. So that's why you see a lot of times individuals who have a perfect opportunity to strike and ask the tough questions, but they don't, because there are consequences to asking those tough questions. And media can use fear as a controlling mechanism to silence its critics. From a feminist perspective, You can argue that the media in many ways promotes gender inequities, gender inequalities. Women are largely represented in high-end or high-profile media positions. And when women are shown on the screen, they're oftentimes used as props because we've turned the female body into commodity, right? We have younger women sitting next to a much older individual, right? This idea that this sexist ideology is force-fed to us in some way, at least on television networks that focus on the news. That television shows, for example, may stick to a more traditional approach to defining men and women and their roles within the family. And from a functionalist perspective, the idea that media outlets promote consumption, and that's beneficial to society because it helps maintain our values, it helps maintain our norms, it helps feed into the economy. This idea that the media is used as a tool to share information, and it's there to feed the needs of a growing and a changing population. And so this idea that the media has the ability in many ways to shape how we converse with one another, to shape how businesses do business, to shape the information that is allowed to be shared with us. And as I mentioned before, only a small handful of companies control the media today. The idea that they are able to take control over all aspects of media. So you think you're getting a diversity of opinion. You think you're saying, hey, I'm not going to listen to this company, but I'll listen to this company, not realizing that they're all owned by only a handful of large media companies. You think about Disney, for example. Not only do they own the theme parks and the hotels, they also control the Disney Channel. They also control ABC. They also control ESPN. So they have the ability to cross-promote, cross-market their products and their programs. So we really don't have freedom when it comes to the media because these large corporations control a majority of the media outlets. The internet has given us, to an extent, some freedom. Now, whether or not that freedom is accurate and positive varies from individual to individual. But this idea that the internet has shaped how companies do business, the idea that now, rather than simply just producing products, many businesses have gone into the business of distributing products, Netflix, Hulu, for example, just to name a few. Now, of course, they produce their own products, but they're largely a distribution company. This idea that the internet has paved the way for more viewpoints to be shared, for more viewpoints to be accessed. Right? The idea that individuals now have the freedom to share their opinions or their thoughts without being told, hey, advertisers are not going to support you.